Scary telling. I've always had a passion for writing. Creating characters, building worlds, and weaving intricate plots have been my life's work. My latest project is an autobiography, but it has been a little dull so far. That's why I decided to spice things up. I was struggling with writer's block for a while, so I took a break and went for a walk. It was then that I stumbled upon the perfect inspiration for my story. I saw a group of people walking down the street, and I couldn't help but imagine their lives. What if they were hiding something? What if they had a secret they didn't want anyone to know? That's when it hit me. I would kill off a few characters in my book, and it would add a whole new level of intrigue. I went back to my writing desk and started to craft my plan. I knew I wanted to create a thriller, something that would keep readers on the edge of their seats. My book was about to become a masterpiece, and I couldn't wait to share it with the world. The first character I killed off was an old friend of mine, someone who had wronged me in the past. It was easy to imagine her death in gruesome detail, and I found myself getting more excited as I wrote. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed killing off my characters, but it was the perfect way to vent my frustrations. As I wrote, my characters took on a life of their own. They started to become more real, and I found myself getting lost in their world. It was as if they were real people, and I was just documenting their lives. But then something strange started to happen. I began to see my characters everywhere. They were in my dreams, on the street, and even in my house. I would catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, they would disappear. I started to become paranoid, thinking that someone was following me. I would hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I was convinced that my characters had come to life, and they were out to get me. I tried to ignore it and keep writing, but things only got worse. Every time I killed off a character, I would see them again. It was as if they were haunting me, punishing me for taking their lives. One night, I woke up to find one of my characters standing at the foot of my bed. I screamed and tried to run, but he grabbed me by the arm and whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." I struggled to get away, but he was too strong. He pulled me closer and closer until I was face to face with him. That's when I realized something was off about him. He had no face. I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced that it was just a nightmare. But then I saw him again, standing in the corner of my room. I tried to run, but he grabbed me by the arm and pulled me close. He whispered in my ear, "I'm not done with you yet." From that day on, I couldn't escape my characters. They were everywhere I went, tormenting me and punishing me for playing God with their lives. I had created them, but now they were in control, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. In the end, I had no choice but to burn my manuscript and forget about my characters. It was the only way to save myself from their wrath. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I can still hear them whispering my name. I know they're still out there, waiting for me to create them again. But I'll never make that mistake again. I'll never try to control their lives or take away their agency. I've learned my lesson, and now I write with caution, always keeping in mind that my characters are not just words on a page, but living, breathing beings with their own wills and desires. The moral of my story is that as much as we may want to control the lives of our characters, we must always respect their autonomy. They may just come back to haunt us if we don't. So, if you're a writer reading this, beware the power of your words and the characters you create. They may not always stay confined to the pages of your book. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I was driving home from work when I witnessed a mother lifting a car off her baby. The baby was trapped underneath, and the mother seemed to have superhuman strength as she lifted the car off the ground. I couldn't believe my eyes. I pulled over to the side of the road and rushed over to the woman. She was panting and sweating, but she had a look of relief on her face. I asked her if she needed any help, but she just ignored me and kept staring at her baby, who was now crying and covered in dirt. I tried to get closer to the baby, but the mother wouldn't let me. She started yelling at me, telling me to stay away from her child. Her eyes were wild, and she looked like she was in a trance. I tried to calm her down, but it was no use. She just kept repeating that her baby was the devil. I was getting scared now. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police or ambulance? Should I try to take the baby away from her? I decided to call the police, but when I pulled out my phone, the mother suddenly attacked me. She was incredibly strong, and she started to beat me with her fists. I tried to defend myself, but I couldn't fight back against her. She was too strong. Eventually, she knocked me to the ground and ran off with her baby. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath. I felt like I had just witnessed something evil. The mother had lifted a car off her baby, but then she had dropped it back down again, calling her baby the devil. What was going on? I decided to follow the mother, but when I got to her house, she was nowhere to be found. The front door was open, and I could hear strange noises coming from inside. I cautiously stepped inside and looked around. The house was empty, but there was a strange smell in the air. It was like something had died. I followed the smell to the basement, and that's when I saw it. The mother was sitting in a corner, holding her baby. She was chanting something in a language I didn't understand, and the baby was covered in blood. There were symbols drawn on the walls and the floor, and the room was lit by candles. I realized then that this was no miracle. This was something much darker. The mother had made a deal with the devil, and her baby was the sacrifice. She had lifted the car off her baby, but not out of love. She had done it to prove her loyalty to the devil. I tried to leave quietly, but the mother saw me and started to come after me. I ran up the stairs and out of the house, but I knew that I wasn't safe. The mother and her baby were possessed by evil, and I was now a witness to their unholy miracle. I've always been a fan of horror movies and thrillers, but I never expected to be in one myself. It all started a few weeks ago when I began hearing a strange giggle coming from my TV. It didn't matter what channel or volume it was on, the giggle persisted. At first, I thought it was just a glitch or interference from another channel. I tried changing the channel, but the giggle followed me. I tried turning down the volume, but the giggle remained just as loud. I even unplugged the TV, but as soon as I plugged it back in, the giggle started again. The giggle itself was creepy enough, but what really started to scare me was the fact that I never thought to check behind the TV. It was an old CRT TV, bulky and heavy, and it had been sitting in the same spot for years. I never had a reason to move it. As the days passed, the giggle grew louder and more frequent. It started to sound less like a child's giggle and more like a sinister cackle. I started having trouble sleeping at night, fearing that the giggle would wake me up or worse, that something would crawl out of the TV. One night, I finally mustered up the courage to investigate. I cautiously approached the TV, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached out to move the TV, but before I could touch it, the giggle turned into a maniacal laugh. I froze in fear, my mind racing with all sorts of terrible possibilities. Slowly, I turned around to face the TV, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Behind the TV, staring at me with glowing red eyes, was a grotesque creature. Its skin was pale and mottled, and it had long, sharp teeth that glinted in the light. Its twisted grin seemed to stretch from ear to ear, and its laughter echoed through the room. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The creature started to crawl out of the TV, its limbs contorting in unnatural ways. I stumbled backwards, tripping over the coffee table and landing hard on the floor. When I looked up, the creature was gone. The giggle had stopped, and the TV was just a TV again. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew it was real. Since then, I've been living in constant fear. Every time I hear a strange noise or see something move out of the corner of my eye, I'm reminded of that terrible night. I'm afraid to watch TV, afraid to be alone in the dark, afraid that the creature will come back for me. I don't know what that thing was, or where it came from, but I know that it's still out there. Maybe it's lurking behind someone else's TV, waiting for its next victim. All I know is that I'll never forget the sound of its laughter, or the way its eyes seem to glow in the darkness. The TV may be off, but the horror is never ending. I was born a twin, and my sister and I have been inseparable ever since. People always said we were joined at the hip, but that was more than just a figure of speech for us. You see, my sister and I share the same vital organs. It's rare, but it happens sometimes with identical twins. We've lived our whole lives like this, and for the most part, it hasn't been a problem. But recently, things have changed. My sister was diagnosed with cancer, and it's spreading rapidly. The doctors say there's nothing they can do, that it's too late for any kind of surgery or treatment. We've known this day might come, but it doesn't make it any easier to face. As the days go by, my sister's condition worsens. She's in constant pain, and I can feel it too, because we share the same body. I can feel her fear, her desperation, her longing for a life she'll never get to live. And I feel helpless, because there's nothing I can do to ease her suffering. One night, as I lay in bed next to her, I felt her grip on my hand tighten. "Promise me something," she said, her voice weak and raspy. "Promise me you won't let me die alone." I promised her, of course. But as the days went by and her condition worsened, I began to realize what that promise really meant. It meant that when she took her last breath, I would feel it too. It meant that when her heart stopped beating, mine would stop too. The thought was terrifying, but it was also inevitable. And as the day approached, I found myself becoming more and more detached from the world around me. I stopped going to work, stopped seeing my friends, stopped doing anything that wasn't directly related to my sister's care. Finally, the day came. I held her hand as she took her last breath, and I felt the life drain out of her body and into mine. For a moment, I felt like I was drowning, like her pain and fear and longing were all crashing down on me at once. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. I lay there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think. And then, slowly, I began to realize that something was wrong. It wasn't just that my sister was gone, it was that something had changed inside of me. I felt different, like there was a presence in my mind that wasn't mine. It took me a while to figure out what was happening. But when I did, I knew that my worst fears had come true. My sister's spirit, her consciousness, her very soul, had somehow merged with mine. We had always shared a body, but now we were sharing a mind too. At first, it wasn't so bad. We could still communicate, still interact with each other. But as time went on, things started to get weird. I would find myself thinking things that weren't my own thoughts, feeling things that weren't my own feelings. And sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I would see my sister's face looking back at me. It wasn't long before I realized that my sister's presence in my mind was more than just a haunting memory. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was growing stronger every day. And as it grew, it became more and more clear that my sister wasn't content to just exist in my mind. She wanted to take control. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I couldn't just let my sister take over my body, but I also couldn't bear to let her go. It was a constant battle, one that I wasn't sure I could win. One night, I woke up to find myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. But it wasn't me I was seeing, it was my sister. Her face was twisted into a grotesque, manic grin, and her eyes were filled with a cold, calculated intelligence that I'd never seen before. "You can't fight me forever," she said, speaking through my mouth. "We're in this together, and you know it." I tried to resist her, to push her out of my mind, but it was no use. She was too strong, too determined. And as I watched, helpless, she began to transform my body. My limbs twisted and contorted, my bones snapped and shifted, and my skin stretched until it felt like it would tear apart at any moment. When it was over, I was something else entirely. I was a monster, a twisted, misshapen creature with two hearts, one body, and a mind that was no longer my own. And as I looked down at myself, I realized that I was no longer alone. My sister was there with me, her presence now a physical one. We were fused together, forever. The world outside was filled with screams and sirens, but they didn't matter anymore. My sister and I were together, and nothing else mattered. We were two hearts, one body, one soul, forever trapped in a twisted, grotesque existence. And in that moment, I knew that we would never be able to escape each other. We were together, forever, in a way that no one else could ever understand. I've been working at the morgue for a few years now, and I've seen everything there is to see. But the night shift always brings a special kind of eerie feeling to the place. It's just me and the dead bodies, and it feels like they're watching my every move. I've never been scared of the dead, but that all changed on one fateful night. It was a Saturday night, and the city was bustling with activity. The bars were full, the streets were crowded, and the morgue was no different. People were dropping like flies, and we were running out of space to store the bodies. I had never seen so many corpses in my life. Another young couple came in through the door, and I hurried to get a table ready, sighing, "Weekends are always so busy." I put on my gloves and began to examine the bodies. Car accidents, murders, drug overdoses, it's always the worst shift in the morgue. As I was examining one of the bodies, I heard a faint noise coming from the other side of the room. I assumed it was just the air conditioning, but then I heard it again. It sounded like a whisper, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but the whispers grew louder and more frequent. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to investigate. I walked to the other side of the room, and that's when I saw her. There was a woman standing in the corner of the room. She was wearing a white dress, and her hair was jet black. She had her back to me, and I couldn't see her face. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I approached her slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could hear her breathing. It was slow and steady, but there was something off about it. It was almost like she was dead. I reached out to touch her, but she turned around and let out a blood-curdling scream. Her face was rotting, her eyes were sunken, and her teeth were jagged and yellow. She lunged at me, but I managed to dodge her. I ran towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was locked from the other side. I turned around, and the woman was getting closer. I backed away slowly, but I tripped over a body and fell to the ground. I looked up, and the woman was standing over me. She reached down to grab me, but I managed to grab a nearby scalpel and stab her in the stomach. She let out a deafening screech and fell to the ground. I managed to get up and run towards the door, and this time it opened. I ran out of the morgue and didn't look back. When I got outside, I called the police, but they didn't find anything in the morgue. It was like the woman had vanished into thin air. I still have nightmares about that night. I don't know what the woman was or where she came from, but I know that I never want to experience anything like that again. The dead should stay dead, and I'll never forget that.